In a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other by name, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds, and white picket fences. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode bicycles until the sun dipped below the horizon. Among the residents was Officer Mark Reynolds, a familiar face in the community. He had been serving as a police officer for over a decade, earning respect for his friendly demeanor and willingness to help. Whether it was directing traffic during school hours or helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, Mark always went out of his way to make people feel safe. But beneath his calm exterior, there was something simmering, something that only those closest to him could sense. Over the years, Mark's job had taken its toll on him. Long shifts, constant pressure, and the weight of responsibility had worn him down. Though he rarely spoke about it, his friends noticed subtle changes. His smile wasn't as wide as it used to be. His jokes weren't as frequent, and sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, a shadow of exhaustion would cross his face. Still, no one imagined that these internal struggles would ever spill into his work or affect the people around him. On this particular afternoon, the air was warm, and the sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink. Birds chirped lazily from tree branches, and the sound of children playing echoed faintly in the distance. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until the call came in. Dispatch reported a noise complaint from Maple Street. Apparently someone had complained about barking dogs disturbing the peace. It was the kind of call officers received all the time, usually requiring nothing more than a quick visit to calm things down. Mark didn't think much of it as he climbed into his patrol car and headed toward the address. Maple Street was located in one of the quieter parts of town. Houses here were spaced farther apart, giving residents plenty of privacy. As Mark pulled up to the house mentioned in the report, he noticed a scruffy golden retriever tied to a fence outside. The dog was barking loudly, its tail wagging furiously, as if trying to catch the attention of anyone passing by. Standing nearby was John Harper, a man well known in the neighborhood for his kindness and skill as a mechanic. John was speaking on the phone, likely explaining the situation to whoever had made the complaint, while occasionally glancing at the dog with a mix of frustration and affection. Mark stepped out of his car, adjusting his hat as he approached the scene. "Afternoon," he said in a tone meant to sound casual but carried an edge of irritation. John turned to greet him, offering a polite wave. "Hey, Officer Reynolds," he replied, his voice calm despite the chaos caused by the barking. "Dog, sorry about the noise. She gets excited when she sees new people." Instead of responding, Mark frowned deeply. His patience, already stretched thin from a long day, began to fray further. To him, the dog's barking wasn't just annoying. It felt like yet another problem he had to deal with. Another burden added to his already heavy load. He muttered something under his breath, shaking his head slightly as he took a step closer to the animal. John, sensing the officer's growing frustration, tried to intervene. "It's okay. I'll take care of it," he assured, reaching for the dog's leash. But before John could do anything, Mark's temper snapped. Without warning, he raised his foot and delivered a sharp kick to the dog's side. The sudden movement startled everyone present, including John, who froze in shock. The dog yelped in pain, recoiling instinctively as it tried to escape the source of discomfort. Its once playful energy vanished, replaced by fear and confusion. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Even the birds stopped chirping as if holding their breath. John stared at Mark, his expression shifting from disbelief to anger. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising with emotion. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the officer and the frightened dog. "That's not necessary. You can't treat an animal like that." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he straightened up, his jaw tightening as he processed the situation. Rather than apologizing or attempting to explain his actions, he reached for his holster. The metallic click of his gun being drawn broke the silence, sending a chill through the air. Everyone within earshot froze, their eyes widening in horror as they realized what was happening. The once peaceful afternoon had spiraled into something unimaginable. What started as a routine call about a noisy dog had escalated into a confrontation that none of them would forget anytime soon. And as the tension mounted, the entire neighborhood held its collective breath, waiting to see how this volatile situation would unfold. This expanded version provides vivid descriptions and builds suspense to keep readers engaged while staying true to the original outline. Let me know if you'd like me to expand other parts similarly. As Officer Reynolds approached the house on Maple Street, the barking grew louder with each step. The golden retriever, tied to a wooden fence outside the modest home, was clearly agitated. Its tail wagged furiously, but its ears were pinned back, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The dog wasn't aggressive, it simply wanted attention. John Harper stood nearby, leaning against his truck as he spoke into his phone. His voice was calm, though tinged with frustration, trying to reassure whoever was on the other end that everything would be fine. "Yeah, she's harmless," John said, glancing at the dog affectionately. "Just excited, you know how she gets." He chuckled softly, scratching the back of his neck. From where he stood, John didn't notice the patrol car pulling up until the sound of the door closing caught his ear. Turning quickly, he spotted Officer Reynolds stepping out of the vehicle, adjusting his hat as he walked toward them. "Afternoon, officer." John greeted him with a polite nod, putting his phone down momentarily. "Sorry about the noise, I'll get her settled in a minute." Officer Reynolds didn't respond right away. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, squinting slightly as if trying to assess the situation. His posture was stiff, his hands resting lightly on his belt. For a brief moment, there was silence except for the dog's persistent barking. Then, without warning, Mark let out an irritated sigh. "This is what people are complaining about?" he asked, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Can't you control your dog?" John blinked, taken aback by the officer's abruptness. Normally, Mark was friendly during these kinds of calls, offering advice or even cracking a joke to lighten the mood. But today, something felt different. There was an edge to his voice, a tension in his body language that made John uneasy. Still, he tried to remain calm, not wanting to escalate things unnecessarily. "She's just excited," John explained, crouching down to pat the dog gently. "She loves meeting new people. I'll bring her inside in a bit." Mark crossed his arms over his chest, his frown deepening. "Excited or not, this is disturbing the peace," he snapped. "You can't let animals run wild like this. It's disrespectful to your neighbors." John straightened up, feeling a flicker of defensiveness rise within him. "She's not running wild," he replied firmly, keeping his tone measured. "And I'm handling it. No need to make a big deal out of it." For a split second, their eyes met. Mark's gaze was cold, almost piercing, while John's reflected confusion and growing irritation. The atmosphere shifted subtly, the warmth of the afternoon sun doing little to ease the sudden chill between them. The dog, sensing the change in energy, began tugging at her leash, whining softly as if pleading for someone to break the tension. "Listen," John continued, softening his tone slightly. "I'll take care of it, okay? Just give me a minute." But Mark wasn't listening anymore. Something inside him had snapped. Perhaps it was the stress of the job, the endless calls, the long hours, the pressure of maintaining order in a town that seemed to demand perfection. Or maybe it was something deeper, a buildup of unresolved frustrations that had finally boiled over. Whatever the reason, his patience evaporated in an instant. Before John could react, Mark stepped forward, his movements quick and deliberate. Without hesitation, he raised his foot and delivered a swift kick to the dog's side. The impact was jarring, both physically and emotionally. The dog yelped in pain, recoiling instinctively as it tried to escape the source of discomfort. Its once playful energy vanished, replaced by fear and confusion. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Even the birds stopped chirping as if holding their breath. John froze, his mind struggling to process what had happened. 1 second, he was calmly explaining the situation. The next, the officer he trusted to protect the community had lashed out violently. Shock quickly gave way to anger, a fiery surge of emotion coursing through his veins. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, stepping forward to shield the trembling dog. His voice echoed down the street, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Mark turned to face him, his expression hardening. Rather than apologizing or attempting to justify his actions, he reached for his holster. The metallic click of his gun, being drawn, shattered the stillness of the afternoon. Everyone within earshot froze, their eyes widening in horror as they realized what was happening. The confrontation had escalated beyond anything anyone could have anticipated. What started as a simple noise complaint had spiraled into a volatile standoff, leaving the entire neighborhood holding its collective breath. And as the tension mounted, the peaceful afternoon transformed into a scene no one would soon forget. This expanded version adds layers of detail and emotion to engage readers further, building suspense and creating a vivid picture of the events unfolding. Let me know if you'd like me to expand other parts similarly. The metallic click of the gun being drawn was deafening, slicing through the tense air like a knife. It wasn't just a sound, it was a signal, an announcement that everything had changed in an instant. The peaceful afternoon on Maple Street, once filled with the hum of birdsong and distant laughter, now felt heavy, suffocating. Every eye turned toward Officer Reynolds as he aimed the weapon directly at John Harper. His hands trembled slightly, but his face remained locked in a mask of cold determination. John froze, his body rigid with shock. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the barrel of the gun pointed at him, its dark opening seeming to swallow the light around them. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he thought everyone must hear it. "What are you doing?" he demanded again, his voice trembling this time not with anger but with fear. You can't do this." His words hung in the air, unanswered. Officer Reynolds didn't lower the gun or even flinch. Instead, he took a small step forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel driveway. "Don't move," he commanded, his tone icy and clipped. "I'm warning you." Behind John, the golden retriever whimpered softly, her tail tucked tightly between her legs. She had stopped barking entirely, sensing the danger radiating from the two men. Her big brown eyes darted nervously between John and the officer, unsure of what to do. John glanced down briefly at the dog, his protective instincts kicking in despite the chaos unfolding before him. He couldn't leave her. She was scared, hurt, and completely defenseless. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to focus. "Listen to me," John said slowly, raising his hands in surrender. His palms faced outward, a universal gesture of peace, but his voice carried a quiet defiance. "There's no reason for this. I'm unarmed. I haven't done anything wrong." He swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "You kicked my dog for no reason, and now you're pointing a gun at me? This is insane." Officer Reynolds didn't respond immediately. His jaw clenched tighter, the muscles in his neck visibly straining under the weight of whatever storm was raging inside him. To John, it seemed like the man wasn't fully present anymore. He wasn't reacting to the situation logically. Instead, he appeared trapped in some kind of internal battle. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, glistening in the fading sunlight. His breathing grew heavier, almost labored, as if the effort of holding the gun steady required every ounce of strength he had left. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows started to emerge cautiously, their faces pale with disbelief. One woman gasped audibly when she saw the gun, clutching her chest as though trying to hold herself together. A man shouted from across the street, his voice shaking with urgency. "Put the gun down, what are you doing?" But Officer Reynolds didn't seem to hear them. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. Either way, his focus remained solely on John, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. Every movement felt exaggerated. The way John shifted his weight slightly, the way Mark adjusted his grip on the weapon, the way the dog let out another soft whimper. John's mind raced, searching desperately for a way to defuse the situation. He knew better than to make any sudden moves, but standing there helplessly while staring down the barrel of a gun felt unbearable. He tried reasoning again, speaking slowly and deliberately to avoid provoking the officer further. "Look, we don't need to do this," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Just put the gun away. We can talk about this like adults." Still, there was no response. Mark's expression remained unreadable, his eyes locked onto John's face. With an intensity that bordered on obsession, it was as if he were looking past John, seeing something or someone else entirely. Maybe it was the stress of the job finally catching up to him, manifesting in this moment of irrationality. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a fracture, in his psyche that had been widening for years without anyone noticing. As the standoff continued, more people gathered, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Some recorded the incident on their phones, their hands shaking as they captured the surreal moment. Others called 911, their voices frantic as they relayed the details to dispatchers. "There's a cop here with a gun drawn," one woman exclaimed, into her phone. "He's threatening a man over a dog. Please send help." The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. No one dared to intervene directly, afraid of making things worse. But the murmurs grew louder, a chorus of protests rising from the crowd. "This isn't right," someone yelled. "Stand down," another voice added. Each shout was like a tiny crack in the dam holding back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm everyone present. Despite the growing pressure, Officer Reynolds showed no signs of backing down. If anything, his resolve seemed to harden. His breathing steadied slightly, though his grip on the gun remained firm. John, meanwhile, struggled to keep his composure. His hands were still raised, his arms beginning to ache from holding them aloft for so long. Sweat trickled down his temples, mixing with the tears welling up in his eyes. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to beg for mercy, but he knew none of those reactions would help. All he could do was stand there, frozen in place, waiting for whatever came next. And then, just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any worse, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Backup was on its way. The sound startled both men, snapping them momentarily out of their trance-like states. Officer Reynolds blinked rapidly, his gaze flickering toward the road where the approaching vehicles could already be heard. John seized the opportunity to speak again, his voice barely above a whisper but laced with desperation. "Please," he said, his eyes locking onto Mark's. "Just stop, before it's too late." For the first time since drawing the gun, Officer Reynolds hesitated. His finger twitched slightly on the trigger, but he didn't pull it. Instead, he stood there, caught between two worlds, one where he maintained control and another where he surrendered to the consequences of his actions. The choice was his to make, but the seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly, leaving everyone wondering which path he would take. This expanded version delves deeper into the psychological and emotional dynamics of the scene, keeping readers engaged by exploring the thoughts, fears, and motivations of the characters involved. Let me know if you'd like me to expand other parts similarly. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tension-filled air like a lifeline. For John Harper, it was both a relief and a source of mounting dread. Relief because help was finally on the way, but dread because he didn't know how Officer Reynolds would react to the arrival of backup. Would the presence of other officers calm him down, or would it push him further into the corner he seemed determined to defend? Officer Reynolds stood frozen, his gun still aimed at John, though his grip appeared less steady now. His knuckles were white from clutching the weapon so tightly, and his breathing came in shallow bursts. He glanced toward the road again, where flashing red and blue lights could already be seen bouncing off nearby houses. The sound of tires screeching as patrol cars pulled up added another layer of urgency to the scene. John, for his part, remained rooted in place, his hands still raised, in surrender. His mind raced with questions. What happens next? Will they believe my side of the story? And most importantly, will I make it out of this alive? Despite his fear, he forced himself to stay calm. Any sudden movement or outburst might provoke Reynolds further, and he couldn't risk escalating things. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on the officer's face, searching for any sign of hesitation or humanity. By now, the crowd of neighbors had grown larger, their murmurs turning into a low hum of concern. Some shouted encouragements to John, urging him to stay strong. Others directed angry words at Officer Reynolds, demanding that he lower his weapon. "You're outnumbered," one man yelled. "Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." Another woman pleaded, her voice breaking. "Think about what you're doing. This isn't who you are." But Officer Reynolds didn't seem to hear them, or if he did, he blocked them out entirely. His focus was singular, almost obsessive, as though he and John were the only two people left in the world. Yet, cracks were beginning to show in his composure. Beads of sweat rolled down his temples, and his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. The weight of the situation, the gravity of what he'd done and what he might do next was visibly crushing him. When the first backup officer stepped out of their vehicle, the dynamic shifted immediately. It was Sergeant Linda Hayes, a commanding figure known for her no-nonsense approach and sharp instincts. She took in the scene quickly, assessing the standoff between Reynolds and John, the frightened dog cowering behind them, and the growing crowd of onlookers. Her expression hardened as she approached cautiously, her hand resting lightly on her own holstered weapon. "Mark," she called out firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Stand down. Now." Reynolds flinched at the sound of her voice but didn't lower his gun. Instead, he turned slightly to look at her, his eyes wide and wild. "Stay back," he warned, his tone laced with desperation. "This doesn't involve you." "It does now," Sergeant Hayes replied without missing a beat. She took another step closer, her movements deliberate and measured. "You've drawn your weapon on an unarmed civilian over a dog. That's not protocol, Mark. You know that." Her words seemed to pierce through some of the fog clouding Reynolds' mind. He blinked rapidly, his gaze darting between John, the sergeant, and the crowd. For a fleeting moment, it looked like he might lower the gun. But then his resolve hardened again, and he shook his head vehemently. "No," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "This isn't right." Sergeant Hayes exchanged a quick glance with the other officers who had arrived. They spread out strategically, forming a loose perimeter around the scene. One of them addressed the crowd, asking them to step back for their own safety. Slowly, reluctantly, the neighbors complied, retreating to a safer distance but refusing to leave entirely. Their phones remained trained on the unfolding drama, capturing every detail. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hayes continued trying to de-escalate the situation. "Mark, listen to me," she said, her voice softer but still firm. "You're making this worse. Lower your weapon, and we can talk about this. No one has to get hurt here." John watched silently, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to say something, to plead with Reynolds to stand down, but he knew better than to interrupt. Anything he said might set the officer off again, and he couldn't afford to take that risk. So he stayed quiet, his eyes shifting between Reynolds and the sergeant, hoping against hope that reason would prevail. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Reynolds stood there, torn between his instincts and the reality of the situation. Finally, with a visible effort, he loosened his grip on the gun ever so slightly. His arms began to lower inch by inch until the weapon was pointed at the ground rather than at John. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, though the tension remained thick in the air. Sergeant Hayes moved swiftly, closing the gap between herself and Reynolds. "Good choice," she said, her tone neutral but reassuring. She reached out carefully, taking the gun from his trembling hands. Once it was secured, she signaled to another officer, who stepped forward to guide Reynolds away from the scene. As they led him toward a patrol car, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and his head bowed as if the weight of the world had settled squarely on his back. With Reynolds removed from the immediate area, attention turned to John and the dog. Sergeant Hayes approached them cautiously, her demeanor softening slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her gaze flickering between John and the golden retriever, who was still cowering near the fence. John nodded slowly, lowering his arms at last. His muscles ached from holding them up for so long, and his legs felt weak beneath him. I'm fine, he managed to say, his voice hoarse from the strain of the past few minutes. He knelt beside the dog, gently stroking her fur to reassure her. She's scared, but I think she'll be all right. Hayes nodded, her expression grim. We'll need statements from everyone involved, she explained. But for now, just take care of yourself, and the dog. She paused, glancing at the crowd before adding, and thank you for staying calm. That couldn't have been easy. As the adrenaline began to wear off, John realized just how close he had come to disaster. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. The golden retriever whimpered softly, nudging her nose against his arm as if offering comfort. Together they sat there amidst the remnants of the chaotic scene, surrounded by neighbors who were now whispering amongst themselves, processing what they had just witnessed. Though the immediate danger had passed, the aftermath loomed large. Questions lingered in the air. Why had Reynolds snapped? Could this have been prevented? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen next? For John, for the dog, and for the community that had once trusted its police force implicitly. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Maple Street, the neighborhood began to settle into an uneasy quiet. But the events of that afternoon would leave scars, reminders that even the safest places weren't immune to moments of darkness. This expanded version builds suspense while exploring the emotional and psychological impact of the confrontation, ensuring readers remain engaged throughout. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding other. The aftermath of the confrontation on Maple Street was a whirlwind of emotions, questions, and disbelief. As Officer Reynolds was led away to a patrol car, his head bowed in shame, the crowd of neighbors began to disperse slowly, but not before, exchanging horrified glances and hushed whispers. Some were visibly shaken, clutching their phones tightly as they replayed the videos they had captured. Others stood frozen, staring at the spot where the standoff had unfolded, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. John Harper remained kneeling beside the golden retriever, his hands trembling as he stroked her fur. The dog, who had been so full of energy just hours earlier, now lay curled up near the fence, her tail tucked between her legs and her big brown eyes wide with fear. She whimpered softly every time John touched her, flinching instinctively as if expecting another blow. It broke his heart to see her like this, so small, so vulnerable, so betrayed by someone she had trusted implicitly. "Hey, girl," John murmured, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's okay. You're safe now." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, breathing deeply to steady himself. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the sweat that still clung to his skin from the adrenaline rush. For a moment, he allowed himself to cry, not just for the dog, but for everything that had happened. He couldn't shake the image of Officer Reynolds aiming the gun at him, couldn't unhear the metallic click of the weapon being drawn. It was surreal, almost dreamlike, except it had been all too real. Sergeant Linda Hayes approached cautiously, giving John space to collect himself. When she finally spoke, her tone was gentle yet firm. "We'll need to take a statement from you," she said, crouching down beside him. "But first, let's make sure you and your dog are okay." John nodded slowly, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "I'm fine," he replied, though his shaking hand suggested otherwise. "But Max," his voice trailed off as he glanced at the dog again. "She's hurt. I don't know how bad it is." Hayes nodded, signaling to one of the officers nearby. Within moments, an animal control van arrived, accompanied by a veterinarian who specialized in emergency care. The vet carefully examined Max, checking for broken bones or internal injuries. Thankfully, the kick hadn't caused any permanent damage, just bruising and soreness, but the emotional toll was evident. Max shivered uncontrollably, refusing to look anyone in the eye. As the vet tended to the dog, Sergeant Hayes turned her attention back to John. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked, pulling out a notepad. Her demeanor was professional, but there was a hint of compassion in her eyes. She understood that reliving the incident would be difficult, but it was necessary to piece together the events accurately. Taking a deep breath, John recounted everything, from the initial noise complaint to the moment Officer Reynolds drew his gun. His voice wavered at times, especially when describing the kick to Max and the subsequent threat. Hayes listened intently, jotting down notes without interrupting. Occasionally, she asked clarifying questions, ensuring she captured every detail. By the time John finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the street in shadowy hues of purple and gray. Meanwhile, other officers were busy gathering statements from witnesses. Neighbors lined up eagerly, each eager to share their account of the incident. Some described hearing the commotion from inside their homes. Others recalled seeing Officer Reynolds' aggressive behavior firsthand. One elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, tearfully recounted how she had watched the entire scene unfold from her porch. "He didn't hesitate," she said, pointing to where Reynolds had stood. One second he was yelling, and the next, he pulled out his gun. It was terrifying. The officers documented every word, knowing that these testimonies would play a crucial role in determining what happened and why. They also collected video footage from bystanders, piecing together multiple angles to create a comprehensive timeline of events. The investigation was already underway, and it promised to be thorough. Back at the police station, Officer Reynolds sat alone in an interrogation room, his head buried in his hands. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Why had he lost control? What had driven him to act so irrationally? These questions haunted him, gnawing at his conscience until he felt physically ill. When Sergeant Hayes entered the room, she found him slumped over the table, his uniform wrinkled and his tie loosened. For the first time in years, he looked less like a police officer and more like a man grappling with his own humanity. "Mark," she began, her tone measured but firm. "We need to talk about what happened today." Reynolds lifted his head slowly, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers. "I messed up," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what came over me." "That's what we're here to figure out," Hayes replied, taking a seat across from him. She placed a digital recorder on the table, pressing the record button before continuing. "Start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what led to this." For the next hour, Reynolds recounted his version of events. He spoke haltingly at first, struggling to find the right words. But as he delved deeper into his explanation, certain patterns emerged. He admitted feeling overwhelmed by the stress of his job, citing long hours, mounting pressure, and unresolved frustrations as contributing factors. He also confessed to having snapped when confronted with the barking dog, claiming it triggered something primal within him, a mix of irritation and helplessness that spiraled out of control. Hayes listened attentively, her expression unreadable. While she sympathized with the challenges officers faced, she couldn't ignore the severity of Reynolds' actions. Drawing a weapon on an unarmed civilian over a minor issue like a noisy pet was unacceptable under any circumstances. And kicking a defenseless animal? That was unforgivable. By the end of the interview, both parties knew the road ahead would be difficult. Reynolds faced disciplinary action, possibly even criminal charges, depending on the outcome of the investigation. For now, he was placed on administrative leave pending further review. As Hayes escorted him out of the interrogation room, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This wasn't the Mark Reynolds she had known, a dedicated officer who genuinely cared about protecting his community. Something had changed, and it was clear that addressing those underlying issues would require more than just punishment. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Word of the incident spread rapidly, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Videos of the confrontation went viral, drawing national attention to the small suburban town. Protesters gathered outside the police station the following day, holding signs that read "Justice for John and Max" and demanding accountability. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, interviewing residents and experts alike. Amidst the chaos, John tried to focus on healing, both for himself and for Max. With the support of friends and family, he brought the dog home, vowing, to give her the love and care she deserved. Though scars remained, both physical and emotional, he refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into advocating for change, joining community meetings aimed at improving relations between law enforcement and civilians. As days turned into weeks, the incident became a turning point for the town. Conversations about mental health awareness, accountability, and compassion gained traction, inspiring initiatives designed to prevent similar situations in the future. For better or worse, the events on Maple Street served as a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of rebuilding it when it's broken. This expanded version dives deeper into the emotional fallout and investigative process, keeping readers engaged while exploring the broader impact on the community. Let me know if you'd like to continue expanding other parts.